Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Sunday and welcome to Norse Studies Week 4. Get comfortable. I went through a lot of information this week, so we're going to be here a little while. But to begin with, I went to the Heathen Handbook and I covered the entirety of Section 2. It's about heathen culture, the worldview, ethics, and women. So worldview, as translated from the German term, which is Weltanschauung, best I can do. It means a broad philosophy or belief system upon which a person bases her perception of the world. This is about having a framework for understanding moral concepts such as good and evil, the role of fate and free will, as well as the meaning of what actually constitutes a community. A worldview must allow for evolution, because if it stagnates, not only is the system in and of itself in decay, but so are the spirits of the people who adhere to that system. Another aspect of this is that reality is something that is to be embraced, not ignored. And then we get into these various concepts in the book. And it began with the concept of heilager, that generally refers to health, wholeness, holiness, being hale, balanced, and complete. It's about living a full, multidimensional life. The author stated how unhealthy it is to neglect the full range of life, and sacrificing every other aspect of your life to specialize in one thing is extremely damaging. We need to have a balanced approach to our various duties, obligations, and pursuits. Otherwise, we're going to be having problems. And we should be concerned with being healthy, and we should measure our practices and beliefs against that idea. The ancestors incorporated this idea of wishing people health and happiness into their greetings. If they were to say hello or hailsa, it was to wish someone health and wholeness, which what better wishes could you possibly ask for? The next concept was that of the well and the tree. And they said that the reason why this metaphor works so well is because it's in line with heathen practices to be straightforward and to get down to the basic principles of things, understand the simplified view, and then you go back and you look at the complexities and the details later. That is a zone I am very, very much comfortable in. But the idea of the well and the tree is that the universe is conceptualized as a great tree that is nourished by a very large well. Each individual can be seen as a tree to be nourished by their well. And in fact, all living things or groups of people can also be seen as a tree that is sustained by a well. It's just a question of are you looking at the individual scale or something larger? Yggdrasil, of course, is the world tree. It represents the entirety of the universe, which is seen as a living thing in and of itself, and all living things are interconnected with it, and they to it. And at the foot of Yggdrasil is a well, called the Well of Weird, in which is contained the essence of all there has ever been in the universe, and that is influencing the shaping of the present and ultimately the future. Which brings us to the Norns. We have Erd, Verdandi, and Skuld who sit by that well, and they draw water to nourish Yggdrasil. They are taking that past to nourish the tree. While it is common to equate these Norns with past, present, and future, the authors thought that was a little bit of an oversimplification. They said that Erd represents more precisely everything that has come before and is waiting to have an effect. It's something that hasn't fully taken place yet. It's still in motion, if you will. And then Verdandi represents our immediate reality that Erd, of course, gave birth to. This is what has already come from it. And then Skuld is what must occur because of what is emotion in our immediate present, which has resulted from what has become before. It's that next link in the chain. So yes, you could say past, present, and future, but there's a little bit more to it, clearly. This all creates a cycle. It affirms the relationship between cause and effect, and it's governed by natural law to which we are all subject. I mean, the gods themselves, they are all bound within this natural law. And consequences are inescapable. That's part of what makes the universe work. Next, the authors talked about the man tree, referring again to that concept of each individual could be considered their own tree, and that at the foot of the tree we have our own well from which water flows, feeds the tree, and then eventually those dewdrops go up and then they fall back down into the well, symbolizing a completed action. This is orlog, and as a concept that's translated as primal law or forward-moving law. It is like that dewdrop I just mentioned, a deed that we did that falls into the well and then mixes with the waters of every action we have ever taken before. Good or bad, the thing is done, and we own what we have done for the rest of our lives. And our present deeds will then create our future, because remember, we are bringing up water from our own wells. Then we have weird, which is often called fate or destiny, but it's more so about drawing upon the waters of our well, and those include the things that we have put into that well. It's the force of our past affecting our present. Then we have Hamingya, which is what makes us the kind of people that we are. On the individual level, this would be more like the spirit, and on a larger scale, it is this Hamingya. Then we have Migan. This is the power of the Hamingya, its spiritual strength, and the degree to which it can affect the world, and that further shapes our fate. Next concept is Gipta. It's sometimes called luck, but it's not as random as that. It's more so about what we build up for ourselves as our Hamingya works on our weird day in and day out. When we talk about luck or chance in the way that we're more accustomed to, that would be the term Gefa. But Gipta is you making your own luck, forging that path. Then we have the life of the tree. This is a metaphor that shows a variety of balancing factors, and it illustrates that we're not helpless. We're not just the playthings of the Norns. We are actively participating in how life turns out for us, and we have the power to alter it. I mean, we can't escape the natural and logical consequences for our choices. I mean, that part is fixed. But we can make different choices. If we find ourselves on a bad path, we can turn ourselves around, make different decisions, and improve our circumstances from there. We still have to pay for what we've done, but we can move forward in a better direction. And that principle holds true on both the individual and the societal level. And then we have this business of tying our weird into another person's weird. As we understand, no individual's life is completely independent of every other individual. We share our lives with people to varying degrees. This much is unavoidable. And the more we choose to associate with someone, the more we share the water of our well. This is what mixes everyone's weird together, which of course comes with consequences, good, ill, both, in between. And who we associate with, especially our close associates, it says something about who we are. The book gave the example of someone who keeps company with liars. Such a person gives the impression that they don't value honesty, and they likely wouldn't blink at being dishonest themselves. In effect, the dishonesty of the liars has been put into that person's well, whether they have lied yet or not, and there will be consequences for that association. But on the other hand, if an individual makes it a practice to associate with people of genuinely good character, that gives rise to the belief that that person also strives to be of good character, and then that deed goes into their well, and then they have the consequences for that. Next concept is called Garth, which is about community. This is also about living a full life, which includes participating in a real and active community, not floating around like detached atoms the way we seem to in our modern age. This is about starting to weave together some threads for ourselves. And this brings up the folk. And who are the folk? Because broadly it means my people, but what does that consist of? There's considerable disagreement on this point, and the term not the toink, dear gods, I'm okay. The term folk is not always used in the exact same sense on every single occasion. It could refer to your own ancestral kin. Blood ties are a very real thing. And even though we don't share much DNA with our 20 times great-grandfathers as we do with our fathers and our brothers, it is still a link. It is still real. We still came from them. Another definition is that folk refers to those who share our beliefs and practices. But even that usage is not without controversy, because people disagree all the freaking time about who's really in the club, and there are all kinds of abounding theological disagreements. The narrowest sense, perhaps, is folk means those heathens with whom the speaker has a close and direct relationship. And I think it would be really easy to get hung up on this particular issue and become blind to weightier ideas and concepts and practices. I see people fixate on this. I'm not going to be doing that. My own personal practice is just, the meaning of folk will shift slightly depending on the context, the situation, who's talking. I'm not going to be super concrete about this because there are bigger ideas to grapple with, and people tend to use this particular idea as just an excuse for an argument, and I really don't have time for that in my life. Moving on. We have the law and grith. This is law in the sense of folk law, and grith is a form of truce. It sets the terms for people to interact on terms of mutual goodwill with a desire to operate on common ground. The ancestors are described as having a great reverence for law. And the authors made a point to specify that this is a form of law that solely exists to help and protect people's well-being and to ease them on their way through life. Any stricture that falls short of this standard is not considered as being a valid law. Our nasty politicians we have in government they could do well. They would do very well indeed if they use that as a guide as opposed to whatever it is that's influencing their decisions now. But moving on. The idea of this kind of law, it provides a structure with which people can healthily function together in groups for mutual advantage, and it can bind a community together. So obviously this isn't about having a bazillion random obscure laws that needlessly complicate lives and are designed solely for the purpose of tripping people up so you can collect fines or exact punishment. This is not that kind of law. Next concept is Thew and Frith. Thew is about having real customs that bring a community together, and Frith is about peace, security, safety, contentment, and the joy of being at home amongst your own people. This goes well beyond law or upholding contracts or anything that people must do. It's about honor, exercising justice, hospitality, and forging genuine friendships. These are bonds that go far beyond the reach of law, and you would go to greater lengths for such people with whom you have that bond. This creates kinship, and is what makes communal traditions meaningful and important. This is how belonging is created. And love is what really makes it all possible. I mean, all forms of love in their proper place with their proper expression, this is what cements a community together, because without that, efforts to form a community will fail, which is why you will notice so many internet communities are so short-lived. There isn't that kind of love. There isn't that gelling together of people who are coming together for common purpose. Next principle has to do with gifting. Giving and receiving is extremely important. It displays goodwill. It forms the habit of offering and graciously accepting hospitality. And this is really less about monetary value of what's being given and much more to do with the spirit behind that giving. And then the authors talked about how you must earn your own place. This is about becoming a part of an established community, which consists of accepting their customs and showing that you do accept it through your actions, not just saying, oh, yes, I'm with you guys. It's actually walking the walk. And it's also about earning respect, not waltzing in and expecting people to just automatically respect you and put you on a pedestal when no one knows anything about you and you have done nothing to prove yourself. And of course, even after you have earned your place, you still have that duty to continually conduct yourself in such a way that makes you worthy of having a place in the community. At this point, the authors got onto ethics, and they described ethics, or at least the basis for ethics in a heathen context, as an interplay between the individual and the folk. This is defined by honor, practicality, individual excellence, and dedication to the folk. And this ties back into that concept of the well of weird, building up a record of good deeds, focusing on the improvement of life for the self and for the people. It requires holding yourself to high standards and seeking to be healthy and whole. So then they get into honor, which is described as a foundation stone. It's a measure of an individual's virtue and worth as expressed by their words, body language, and deeds. It is a sense of honor that compels a person to be concerned with right and wrong to begin with and making a point to choose to do what's good, whether that's convenient or not. Honesty is considered an element of honor. And giving and receiving truth both towards oneself and other people enables reality and truth to be recognized in the first place, and it allows society to function. It creates trust, and you can't last very long in society without trust. again, as we have daily proof. Then they discussed loyalty being the next element of honor, which is about faithfulness towards the folk and towards your own beliefs. Loyalty is about knowing where you stand and other people knowing where you stand. It's another component of trust. Then they brought up duty, which is also a component of honor. It's the obligation to act and fulfilling that obligation. Responsibility is a pretty dirty word in our society, but it is a heathen virtue. Attend to your business. Take care of those who are within your sphere and do what you ought to be doing. People will know that they can depend upon you, and they know you will take appropriate action instead of doing nothing and then offering up excuses after the effect and expecting you to clean up their mess. The next virtue the authors talked about was inner strength. This is closely related to the spirit and your drive within your spirit. To become and to continue to be honorable requires motivation. That requires energy, and that energy is what builds up our strength. And then they talked about the roots of heathen ethics. The authors described how the ancestors came to value certain behaviors because it helped sustain life and just made things go more smoothly. In ancient times, there was no, social safety net or anything like that. If you didn't work, then you wouldn't eat or you would have to beg. If you lacked courage, you'd never achieve anything and you were less likely to survive. If you didn't show generosity, people wouldn't be generous in turn, and that weakened a community. So this is why you keep coming back to these core concepts within heathenry, because it literally allowed their civilizations to thrive. Then the authors went into modern heathen ethical models. These are ideas that people have formulated in our modern era, but it's all based upon values that they find in the lore. One of the most common, of course, is the 9 noble virtues, considered by most people to be the core of heathen ethics and a practical way to live life. So things like industriousness, perseverance, self-reliance, hospitality, discipline, fidelity, courage, truth, and honor. And another way to really think about these things is to look at them through the comparisons that strength is better than weakness, courage is better than cowardice, joy is better than sorrow, honor is better than dishonor, freedom is better than slavery, kinship is better than alienation, realism is better than dogmatism, vigor is better than lethargy, ancestry is better than universalism. Then they brought up another system of Anglo-Saxon origins called the Theodish winds and thews. It mentioned 3 winds, which are character traits to development, wisdom, which is knowledge tempered by experience and the ability to apply it, worth mind, which is personal honor and integrity, the adherence to right, and wealth deal, which is generosity and the willingness to share. The 12 thews are principles that should be evident in our conduct. They did mention the Anglo-Saxon terms, but I can't pronounce them, and I'm not going to make your ears bleed. So, in English, they valued industriousness, fairness and justice, courage, fellowship, giving, hospitality, moderation, independence, truth, steadfastness, troth, and wisdom. And if you want to look at the roots of all of these ideas and actually find them in the lore, read the Havamal. This is where all of these ideas ultimately come from. Next, the authors discuss social obligation and the worth of the individual. This is part of the book where they make very clear that the community concept of heathenry is not to be conflated with any notion of communism. These are not the same thing, and honestly, I think it is a real insult to try to overlay any such nasty leftist politics into anything pagan at all. Within heathenry, individualism, personal freedom is highly important. It was a traditional value. Strong individuals, they benefited both themselves and those around them. Their pursuit of excellence really set the tone. It gave them the confidence to act, and that also gave others the confidence to strive to improve themselves because they watched someone progress. They understood it was possible. And this pursuit of virtue and good conduct builds a strong society. Honoring the folk is the recognition that someone is part of the whole, and acting in a manner that tears down the folk is destructive on a myriad of levels. And when we are part of a folk, that can temper our more extreme impulses. It can, in a way, it saves us from ourselves because we might be, going off into whatever direction we're going. But if we have people around us who we trust, who care about us, and who we care about in turn, they can say, maybe you don't want to go that far. Maybe there'd be a better way to handle this. And it can really save us. It can help us a great deal. And of course, when you allow that process, it makes you better. And then when you in turn build up the folk, that creates a better environment for yourself as well. And then also on the topic of honor, the authors emphasize the need for deeds. Oh, without deeds, there can be no honor. Intentions are all very well in their place, but it comes to nothing without actions. This went to the final bit of this section in which they discussed we women. Heathenry is certainly a faith for women as well. Logically, how could it not be? This is all societally based. Obviously, there is no society without women. But I guess some people thought like, oh, well, it's all about warrior stuff and blah, blah, blah. Therefore, it's not about women and all this other junk. That's people bringing their baggage to the faith. It's not actually looking at what the faith is in and of itself. So I think a lot of times we do need to just check our modern ideas, leave them at the door, because a lot of the things that we're so up in arms about today, it wasn't a matter of concern for our ancestors. So, keeping that in mind is probably pretty helpful. So traditionally, women were valued and respected members of heathen society, and that should remain consistent today. And from as far as I can see, that is pretty much the norm of what I've encountered. Now, of course, all respect has to be earned, so women have the same obligation as men to exhibit heathen virtues. And the author mentions several notable role models in heathen past. We have Sigrid the Proud, who was a queen of Sweden. Thordis the prophetess, famous for her wisdom and magic. Odd the deep-minded, known for her wisdom and practicality. Odd Vesting's daughter, of great courage and loyalty. Gunhild King's mother, who was a vulva. And Valeda and Albruna, who were both seeresses. So that would be another avenue to do some research on. Traditionally, women's roles in heathenry is that they were the rulers of the household. And this makes my tyrant's heart very happy. And honestly, that is my natural instinct. I like to be in charge of what goes on around the house. Other things I'm not as concerned with, but inside my home, I like to be the one who is absolutely deciding how things are going to go. And pretty much that's how it works. Women were the runners of hearth and home, the bearers of culture, the educators of the children. They were very diplomatic. They were peace weavers. They settled a lot of things and controversies in their communities. And these are just a few things that was, normal for women to do. And in ancient times, women's inclinations and their skills that they learned, it dictated what roles they were able to take on. They weren't really as limited as women in other societies were. And in matters of religion, women could certainly become vulvas or githas, and they played significant roles in rituals. Women frequently were very learned in matters of medicine and herbal lore and other forms of healing. Generally, they were responsible for looking after sick family members, especially children, who are forever getting sick and getting injured, and someone had to deal with that. But at the end of the day, respect is due to women in heathenry, just the same as that it's due to men. It's all based upon respect earned by the actions of the individuals, and we have to make sure that we are respectable in order to have that. So now that we've gotten through the book, this brings me to what I found out about daily practices. I decided to look further into this because past experience has taught me that the best way to integrate religion into your life is by practicing small, everyday things that help you keep spiritually connected. So this past week, I looked for advice. I'm only going to be mentioning one video here. It's titled My Daily Practices as a Norse Pagan by Wisdom of Odin. Honestly, I wasn't impressed with what other people had to say. But I do like Jacob, and I like his approach to things. One of his first suggestions was to keep your personal symbols and jewelry, sacred jewelry, close at hand, putting them on as a reminder of who we are, of our oaths and our need to keep our words. And that part of the defining aspects of being a Norse pagan is to be a person who does fulfill their oath and who does keep their word. It's the bond and the foundation of everything. And wearing sacred jewelry is a pattern that is found throughout history. It connects us to those who are also of our faith in the present day and those who were part of it in times past. And it furthers that idea of us, we're all this links in the chain, and we're all connecting everything together. Another thing he suggested was getting outside with your morning brew. He's a coffee drinker. I'm a tea drinker. So I'd be taking my tea outside, as I often do, and just sit down, enjoy the drink, and just the outdoor atmosphere, and making time not to rush through the routine. And sometimes that means getting up a bit earlier, but just take a minute, observe the world, absorb the energies of nature, and escape for a few minutes just to reconnect. And the outside world and all of its noise, it will still be there after we do this. So putting it on hold as we kind of get ourselves together for the day, probably a good idea. He also advocated for standing on the earth in your bare feet. He said he didn't think much of this practice before he became a Norse pagan, but once he got into it, he sees that it is a way to reconnect. And he also counseled not to expect, big revelatory moments all of the time, and to learn to enjoy the small, subtle things and just the peace it can bring. Everyday life provides guidance in very small, quiet ways, much more regularly than the big, explosive experiences. He suggested that if possible, find a spot in nature to maintain, set aside as a sacred place, and to help things grow and nurture them, and also to build an altar, indoor or out, and let that serve as a focus for your worship. An offering can even be giving of our time, spending time at our altar, whether it's meditation or prayer or divination or whatever else we're doing, because it infuses our energies into that space just by giving it our full attention, and that time is meaningful. Then he also talked about the objects that we collect as we go along our path that are part of our journey, and having them around us reminds us not just of their symbolism, but also of who we are evolving to be, and the memories of when we came across this or when someone gave us that, and what that really meant for us and how that was a stepping stone as we went along. Now, as I said, I did look at other videos. I looked at other articles to see what people had to say. I found it pretty generic. I wasn't exactly moved by anything earth shattering. But what I did find that I think is useful is that there was a high recommendation of prayer, of daily meditation, making offerings regularly, but it just wasn't terribly earth shattering beyond those points. So overall, I think I'm going to continue to just feel my way through. And next week, I hope to have a lot more to say about what I've chosen to be my personal daily practices. But I want to do a little bit more tweaking because I've been feeling the need to make some adjustments, especially with the equinox just passed. And then this brings us to a discovery of Nordic witchcraft with Freyja Norling. Because I went through so much of the book this week, I only watched one of her videos, but it is titled Trolldom, Norse Magic, and the Witch Hunts of Norway. Now, according to Freyja, Trolldom is the traditional folk magic of Scandinavia, and interestingly, it doesn't necessarily refer to trolls, which felt kind of counterintuitive to me, but definitely something new has been learned through this. If I'm being really honest, I was a bit disappointed. I thought, we were going to talk about the whole scope of trolls, the world of trolls, but no, it's apparently it's different than that. She said that through trolldom, a person can come into contact with quite a variety of spirits, and this may or may not involve trolls themselves. And whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing, that there seems to be some differences of opinions there. But practicing trolldom seems to be about having the innate ability to tune into things. It's not something that can be learned. She said this is a contrast from Seether, which is generally thought to be a learned skill. But trolldom requires actually being born with the gift. At least that's how she described it. You might draw a parallel with this with other magical systems, with people who are essentially born with the capacity to become witches, and then other people who have to take a more roundabout way to try to learn how to manipulate these magical energies. And there's always a little bit of tension in between these more naturalized versus these more I'm not sure what word I really want to use, because it isn't just the structure of these other paths in and of themselves. It's just it's very procedural, of people having to go through a lot of procedures, jump through a lot of hoops, do a lot of extra things that if someone is more naturally inclined, you don't have to, because you're already on the wavelength. So going on, she says that, of course, the practice of trolldom was later outlawed, and we all know why. Those who were refused to give it up in favor of adopting Christianity, at a certain point in history, they just began burning them for execution. Of course, this occurred during the Middle Ages, and most frequently, the execution did not occur before torturing the accused witches. Interestingly, and this was really I'm not sure why this was, but she said that most of these burnings were conducted in the winter months, in which the dark was a near constant. And she said it was also a little bit odd that most of these witch panics, they originated in a single community that I guess was around about 3,000 people all told. And at one point, there was a period of time in which 100 were accused, 90 were executed, at least. And I just imagine 90 people just knocked off like that, burned alive out of a community of 3,000 people. I mean, just imagine the effect on that. Now I am happy to say that Freyja reports that in this place there's a memorial that honors the victims of this persecution. It's actually located where they believe that the executions took place in times past. And she showed a video about this place, and she saw that you were in this room, and in the center of that room was this chair, and they had these gas pipes coming up through the chair, which were of flames. So it just really brought home to her and anyone who looked at it really of just what people really would have suffered, or at least give them an idea of, this is what it meant. When they were burning the witches, they were burning the witches. I mean, it was, I don't know. You'll have to click on the link to her video below to get another look at it, just because there is something visceral about seeing that just really brings down home the reality of what it was. And of course, there's always going to be some people who believe that witchcraft is of the devil, or that it's a means of weaponizing your ire to cause human suffering to others. And it's very difficult to break down that prejudice, especially if people are under some kind of delusion that they're cleansing the land of witches in the name of their god. So it's important for us to be active members of society, to stand up for freedom of religion, and to oppose all attempts that seek to impose anti-pagan and anti-witchcraft ideologies into law. Something that I think is of increasing importance. I mean, as I mentioned, we don't have as much of a problem with this in the West, but I mean, I've encountered some rather wild talk on places like Gab, where people, it sounds like they're about ready to light the matches. They're that kind of people. And I just want to say that I don't think that these people are actually being consistent with any Christian ideology or any religious ideology at all. I think they are just really shitty people, and they're using religion as an excuse to try to act out some of their fantasies. So, food for thought. Bit of a downer, but we will we will move on to more pleasanter topics next week. We went through quite a bit, so if you watched all the way through, thank you very much. I very much appreciate you coming with me on this journey, and please let me know in the comments just your thoughts, your reactions, where your own studies are taking you, or even better, come to Gilded. There's a link in the description box where you can join the Blackbird's Brew server. Be very happy to have you, and I hope to see you soon. But that'll do it for now, and I'll see you next time. Bye.